Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual CISO Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John Berry, and with me, unfortunately, as always, the Garfunkel of Simon, Jeremy Sporn. Hey, Jeremy.
So if I'm Art Garfunkel and you're Paul Simon, does that mean we're going to get really famous together and then you'll just ditch me to do your own thing? Is that the plan?
I think we did it backwards. I think I was famous and brought you on board afterwards. So either way. So by this point, you should have had an opportunity to listen to what I thought was an awesome conversation with Sanjeev.
Absolutely. He is the first self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur I have ever heard that cares more about the products he creates than the money he will make. And he made a damn good product. And I mean that in an extremely complimentary way. He just really cares about how Prevail is helping customers stay secure and bring legitimate good into the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they had developed this product and I think, the CMMC use case came up and it's just absolutely perfect, right? I mean, this is really a potential game changer for a lot of the companies that are going to need to conform with CMMC. I know this podcast has a lot of CMMC feel because it's an important issue at this point in time, but really anyone that needs to ensure that, emails and files that are critical and need to be shared or kept in a highly secure fashion should really have an interest in this. For an example, if you're a law firm, this product is a really interesting one.
Agreed. And the coolest part about Sanjeev's and Prevail's story is they set out to just make a great end-to-end encryption email and file sharing product, which they did. But that journey led them head on with the CMMC completely by accident. It's just it's wild how the world pushes you in places you just don't expect.
Yeah, and I think smart people, quote unquote, make their own luck. So which basically means it isn't luck. Anything else folks should know before we jump to the episode?
Yeah, anyone in the CMMC space who is concerned about the control requirements around email and file sharing, you'll find this immensely helpful. Although Sanjeev hopes anyone and everyone leverages Prevail to have CMMC compliant email and file sharing systems, he does such an amazing job of just educating on why this is important and how business and technology leaders in the defense industrial base can address this challenge. Plus, you really need to hear who he thinks would make a terrible CISO. Just a must listen.
Yeah, now I'm trying to remember who he said. I start to forget them after a while. All right, now I want to listen to the episode, and I barely ever listen to my own podcast. So with that, let's get to the show. Thanks, Jeremy. Sanjeev, how are you today?
I am good. And you, John?
Good to catch up.
Likewise, excited.
I am too. CMMC is definitely on my list of favorite subjects at the moment. I like to start easy. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name is Sanjeev. I'm a serial entrepreneur, about the only thing where you can add the word serial in somewhat of a respectable way. I'm based out of Boston. I'm chairman and co-founder of a cybersecurity company called Prevail, born out of MIT, and we build end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing systems that happen to be a great fit for CMMC compliance.
Cool. And that's in full disclosure, that's why you're here. You had reached out to me. We had taken a look at this and said, this is something that anyone who is potentially pursuing CMMC should be aware of. In addition to some of the other good alternatives from an email perspective. Before we get down to business, we have a tradition. We always ask people, "What's your get to know you a little bit? What's your drink of choice?"
Well, it's summer right now, so my drink of choice is white, crisp French Burgundy. Reminds me of wonderful trips that I've had there, and particularly I like Batard Montrachet. So that's my favorite drink at this time.
What is that Burgundy that you're talking about?
It's a French Burgundy. If you like white wine, it is sublime. So in Burgundy, they make red Burgundies, obviously.
Yep.
But the white Burgundies are absolutely exquisite. And those of your listeners who love, French wines will know that the areas of Puligny Montrachet are the areas where the best wines come from, and Bertard Montrachet is between Montrachet, and actually Bertard, I'm told in French, means a bastard. It's the area in between, but they are exquisite white wines and so dear to my heart.
Okay, so you're going to have to send me a link to one of those, and we'll put it in the podcast as well. From a French wine, I'm not, I like Italians. On the French side, the only French that I regularly drink is a Macon Village Chardonnay, which is quite good. But what happened was that used to be our go-to, and then we got into Russian River Valley Chardonnays at a Sonoma, and fell in love with those, and that's kind of like our current drink. And my wife drinks, has a glass of wine most nights, a white wine, and that's what she drinks. It's a Russian River Valley Chardonnay. Yeah,
I actually, I'm an equal fan of the Russian River Valley, and so there's a couple of vineyards out in the valley. Two, winemakers that are particular favorites of mine. One is Kistler, and the other is Rocchioli.
I'll have to look those up.
They're awesome.
I'm a member of the White Oak is one that we like. Very, very small family owned. We've been a member there for a while. And then Sonoma Kutra. They do a nice job, and it's a relatively reasonably priced wine.
Well, when we get together, when we get together, sometime I'll introduce you to a Kistler or a Rocchioli. I'm on their lists, and they are sublime. So we'll try it out sometime.
You got a deal. Okay, so let's get down to business here. So when you talk about email and we talk about file storage relating to CUI, controlled and classified information, which is or FCI for that matter, federal contract information, that is beholden to NIST SP 800-171 and or CMMC level 3. What are the requirements, that apply to your email or files in terms of security?
So the first thing is that, if you just sort of step back, you've been quite familiar with, I think, NIST 800-171. And, CMMC basically takes all of the NIST 800-171 requirements and augments them with, I think, another 20 odd. And the totality of those basically constitute what CMMC is. And so, in essence, these requirements mandate you to, have information encrypted as much as possible, stored in, appropriate facilities, accessible for forensics. But from a practical perspective, what it means for CMMC is that two of the sort of go-to systems that people have in the cloud, which are, O365 and often G Suite, both are ineligible systems. Microsoft has a version of O365 that it calls GCC High. That's a system that is allowed for CMMC. But the first thing that you have to recognize is that the sort of go-to systems aren't valid. You can also parse the requirements one by one, and for those of your clients that deal with on-premise systems, they can sort of go step by step and ensure that all of the data, encryption, the data storage, the data hygiene, the data forensics requirements are met. And they can be. It's a lot of work, but you can do so with an on-prem solution. But I think I would start by just articulating that both for email and file sharing, what's most important is what you can't use. And O365 and Gmail are out. So let's start with that.
All right. So I think you said if I am running my own Exchange server, that if I'm reasonably sophisticated and I've got a pretty decent, IT infosec team, that I should be able to make that quote unquote compliant, correct?
Yes, you have, there's a bunch of work. You'll have to do a lot of configurations to ensure there's a proper level of encryption, that you're using appropriate, certificates, etc. But you're absolutely right that, you can, with a sophisticated InfoSec team, and perhaps also support from, folks like yourselves, the combination of your, inputs and a sophisticated, team together can go make such a system, work on premise.
Gotcha. But if we look at the, you hear numbers of somewhere between 315 and 350,000 members of the DIB, and I've actually heard some people say that number is going to get a lot higher because as we start to look at the flow down, that this number could reach 1 million. I would assume that, and I don't know if you have the number, that many of those clients are using a hosting provider like Office 365 or Google, right, for their email?
That is correct. So I think that, one of the mega trends has been in the past 5 years, and it's rapidly accelerating, is the movement to the cloud. So, no matter what the number, whether it's 350,000 companies or it's 1 million, nobody knows for sure. But what's inescapable is the fact that I would surmise that a vast majority of them are now on a cloud-based system, like the two that you mentioned, O365 probably being the dominant share, and then a Gmail being the second one.
Gotcha. And you wouldn't have have you seen any statistics on what an estimate might be out of that number? I mean, would it be, if you had to venture a guess, would you think it's half of those 350,000 or 2/3 or no idea?
I have no idea, John, but I would, I'd be guessing. So I would probably stay away. But I think that, just based on, seeing statistics of migration to the cloud, I'd be shocked if it's less than 50%.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And especially because if you think about it, I mean, a significant percentage of those 300 and odd thousand are relatively small organizations, between, I've talked to folks that are talking about 800, 171 and GCC that are as small as, 2 or 3 people. And many of them are in that 50 to 1,000 person range. And I think a lot of those types of organizations are on a hosted mail platform.
You're absolutely right. I think that, when I look at statistics, I think that if you look at the 350,000, I would say 90% or more of them are in the sub 1,000 employee category that you mentioned. And the vast majority of those guys will be on cloud hosted platforms like O365 or Gmail. And there, the numbers are quite clear. I think that, probably somewhere in the, the 80 to 90% of them are on O365, and probably the rest, 10 to 20% on G Suite. That's our statistic.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I mean, an inordinate percentage are on Office 365. So let's talk about Office 365 for a second. They're a monster. We're actually running on Office 365. I'm a fan of the Office 365 product suite. They have been hesitant, and I don't blame them, until the CMMC accreditation body really comes out with the clarification. But all indications are, they have, I think it's 4 levels of government cloud. I think it's GCC, GCC High, or 3. GCC, GCC High, and DoD, correct? Are there 3 levels?
I think that you should just look at it as Microsoft guidance is O365. They call it commercial cloud. There's the GCC, and then there's GCC High.
Okay. So, and everything that I'm seeing unofficially is that you would need to get to GCC High to conform with either 800-171 and or CMMC level 3. Do you agree with that?
Well, that is the official guidance from Microsoft itself. So if you look at it, I think that, and we're happy to share, Microsoft guidance. I'm sure you have it, but they have a neat little, table that compares these 3 systems. And they basically say that, if you want to comply with CMMC or 800-171, you got to be on GCC High.
Yep. Yeah, they have a really smart guy over there by the name of Richard Wakeman. And usually when you look at the top of the blogs that talk about this, his name's on top. He's a really smart, nice guy. I've chatted with him. And so that appears to me to be the guidance. In terms of the other thing, too, is that, I'm noticing an increasing number of the folks that I chat with are talking about ITAR. And I think you've also got to get to either GCC or GCC High to get to ITAR compliance as well.
Yes, I think GCC High, ITAR, represents a Byzantine and very complex set of requirements. And the official Microsoft guidance for that is that you can, again, through setting up proper key management, proper servers, etc., that you could use cloud systems like GCC High to do ITAR, but it's not by default. You got to do a lot of work and configuration to do so.
Yeah, my understanding is that you have to go with one of those that ensures that the data is kept in a certain end data centers that meet that requirement. And then, of course, you've got to have a lot of controls on your side to ensure that only U.S. citizens have access to the data, and that data has no mechanism to be transported, et cetera.
Well, that used to be the requirement, and certainly is the requirement. And in fact, one of the things that GCC High does is that it has U.S. persons, manning the data centers, etc. But I think your viewers will find something fascinating has come out. The State Department came out with a ruling which was interim in December of last year and became permanent in March of this year, which changes the game totally. It basically says that if you are using a cloud service and you use end-to-end encryption, and the keys to the end-to-end encryption are never accessible to the cloud provider. In that case, you can actually use, basic end-to-end encryption to carry, transport, and store ITAR data. And as I will share with you later, that completely changes the game, because you now have the potential to basically share and store ITAR data extraordinarily simply via appropriate end-to-end encrypted systems like the ones that we provide, through regular email and simple file sharing.
Oh, cool.
So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, you and I, when we had chatted originally, we hadn't addressed that issue of ITAR. If you'd be so kind as to also, I need you to start making a list of things you need to send me. So we got the wine stuff. Now you got to send me a link to that, and we'll make sure we put that into the podcast notes, because I think that's valuable information.
Yeah, so I'll absolutely make sure that I send you the ITAR State Department regulations.
Thank you.
Yep, I'd be happy to do that.
They should come after the wine recommendations, just in order of priority, just making sure.
I got it.
Okay, so if somebody's already on Office 365, the commercial license, conventional E3 or E5 or license or something of that nature, and they want to move to let's start with, and I know you don't want this to happen, but they want to stay fully on Office 365. What has to happen? What do they need to do? Tell me a little bit about how that works. What are some of the issues? What are some of the challenges? If you can give us an idea, what does it take to migrate? If you know anything about costs and things of that nature, give us an idea what that would look like.
I think that, first of all, if you are on O365, if you'd go to Microsoft, and what Microsoft would say to you is, look, in order for you to be CMMC compliant, you need to go and migrate to GCC High, because that's how we can comply with all the regulations on data access, data forensics. And on the GCC cloud, we have the ability, GCC High cloud, we have the ability to do so. So the steps that are involved in a simplified manner work something like this. That they would, the organization says, I want to explore my options. They'd come to hopefully a person or an entity like you, and you'd say, please guide us. And so first thing is that there's a few, GCC High resellers, and they would set up a consulting agreement. And so they would essentially say, look, you got to rip O365 and replace it with GCC High. And so there's roughly somewhere between 4 to 6 months of consulting, time period. It costs approximately, $50,000 to $100,000 to do that consulting. And so the organization then determines, what do I need to do to do a cutoff from, my O365 to GCC. And once you've determined it, you've looked at your systems, then the migration will occur. And at that point, you are now, instead of storing your emails and files and on commercial cloud, now you're storing them on GCC High Cloud. And, you have now paved the path to be compliant with, CMMC. So if you are following the path of, the recommended path from Microsoft, that's what the sequence of, steps looks like.
Yeah, does that, that's a big number, and honestly seems a little illogical to me. I mean, it feels like I'm just migrating from one data center to another. But that being said, things cost money. Will that differ a lot if I'm let's say I'm a 5-person company? I mean, is somebody going to charge me 50 grand or 30 grand to migrate a 5-person company from O365 to O365 GCC High?
Well, I can't comment much on whether if that number is, in that zip code, if you're a 5-person company, but I certainly know that, if you are in the 25, person or above, you're looking at a minimum of $30,000.
So even that's small, even that's small, you're talking about that much of a cost?
It's a big cost.
Okay.
And that's going to be the heart of what we're going to be discussing. And that's just the way it is. So there's a major problem if you're a small company. If you're a big company, you're 1,000, people and so forth, you kind of look at it as its cost of doing business. It's still a huge disruptive headache, but, you're more apt to be able to swallow that kind of number, but it is simply unacceptable, choice when it comes to a, 10, 20, 30, 40-person company.
Okay. Let me ask a question. So I have a client that they're a valve manufacturer.
Yeah.
And, they're probably 200 people, but probably only 25 to 50 of them are in the CUI scope. So can they just migrate? How would that work? Would they migrate just, those 25 or 50 people to the GCC High Cloud and leave the rest on Enterprise? Or would, is that the model? So
that's the second, you raised, some very good, points. So again, one would think that a logical choice would be that, let's say you've swallowed the $30,000, $50,000 fees, and you migrate, that, you would want to migrate the 30 to 50 people that are handling CUI. And the second, aspect of it is that the GCC licenses ongoing are more expensive than O365. But it turns out that the way GCC is implemented is that that's not a practical choice. So what the GCC recommendation would be that you migrate the entire organization, which is in your case, as you said, 200 people, to GCC, and not have just the subsegment of the 30 to 50 people that are handling CUI be like a subzone. And if you insist on making that a subzone, all kinds of problems ensue between communication between the subzone and the parent company. So the default recommendation for GCC is go migrate the entire company. And that again, causes problem because fine, you were talking about the 10-person companies earlier, but now you're coming into the spot of, say 200-person company, 50 people doing defense work, 200 people doing non-defense work. And now it becomes prohibitive. So I actually have very accurate statistics because we've done this thing. So if we have a client that was exactly almost that size, 250 people.
Okay.
50 of them are handling CUI. Mm-hmm. And so the GCC High bill for them was $100,000 for that. So that was
I'm sorry, the GCC High bill to migrate to GCC?
To migrate
the consulting cost to migrate?
Consulting costs. Plus the now cost to go and recur. And the reason was that, they had to move all 250 people onto GCC High. The GCC High licenses are, as I understand it, 2 to 3x the price of an O365 license, plus the consulting costs. So it becomes a fantastic number very, very quickly.
Well, fantastic number for Microsoft and their consulting companies. Not a fantastic number for the firm that needs to be CMMC certified, right? So,
well,
so let's
I'm
peel that
using
back.
the word fantastic in a.
Oh, you're being sarcastic. Yeah, they say sarcasm is wasted on fools, so that explains why I didn't get it. So let me peel that number back a little bit because I want to make sure I understood it. So
yeah,
what you're saying is that 250 people, 50 were CUI beholden, 200 weren't. It cost them in the order of magnitude of $50,000 or $100,000 to migrate, and then you're saying, and then you're saying,
yeah.
Okay, so it cost. All right, so let's say it cost them $50,000 to do the migration, working with this Microsoft GCC High partner. And my understanding is only like 7 of them or something that are approved or something.
That is correct.
Like that? Okay.
7 resellers of GCC High.
Okay, so they work with one of those 7 resellers. That reseller helped them make the migration. The bill to do that was around $50,000. Then we have 250 people. I don't recall the exact price of our licensing, but I think can't remember if we're E3 or E5, but it's, and I guess it depends if you have the voice or not. But let's say it's around $30, $35 or something like that. And shake your head if I'm guessing right. Around $30 or $35 for conventional Microsoft commercial license, right, for the full suite. So you're saying that it might cost them somewhere between $60 and $90 per user per month from that point forward?
Yep, depending on the economics. Yep, that is exactly your, Kane, please don't hold me to precise numbers over here, but the ballpark, that's exactly in the zip code of what we're talking about, yes.
So that's a lot. I mean, so you're talking about if you were 250 people at $30, right, is $7,500 a month. You're saying that might go somewhere between $15,000 and $22,500 per month.
It becomes a big number, and that's why when you are looking at a migration, it starts to add up, and it becomes a pretty serious, dent.
Okay. So alternative solutions, right? So I obviously you're on the call to talk about Prevail as an alternative solution. So let's talk about Prevail. Let's talk about if you're aware of other alternative solutions. Like, if I'm listening to this and I'm going like, hey, crap, I can't afford 50 grand plus an additional $10,000 a month forever. What are my options?
So this is where, a company like Prevail comes in. And, I'll tell you before I go into the numbers and the logic of it, that we hadn't created Prevail to solve the CMMC problem. I mean, we had basically built an end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing system that was really simple to use because it handled, the fundamental challenges that are faced by any computer system, including O365, Gmail, etc., and to protect, users from this ever-persistent threat. But it turns out that Prevail is an exceptionally good solution for handling, CMMC in an economic way. So let me explain, first of all, what Prevail is and why it addresses the challenge of, CMMC compliance so well. So Prevail basically is an end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing system. So in email, you basically retain your email address. You don't have to change it. And you send and receive emails with end-to-end encryption, by which we mean that the emails are encrypted on your device and can only be decrypted by the recipient and no one else. They are always encrypted on the server, and even the provider of the service, which is Prevail, cannot decrypt those on the server. By default, they are stored on AWS GovCloud, but if somebody wants to, they can also store them on premise. The same holds for file sharing. File sharing, you should think of Prevail basically like a Dropbox or a Box or a OneDrive. So it's a file sharing and collaboration system, but it's different in that underneath the covers, even though as a user would interact with it just as they would with like a OneDrive, but underneath the covers, everything is end-to-end encrypted. So your files get encrypted right on your computer or your phone. They stay encrypted in the cloud, again on AWS GovCloud. And the only people that can decrypt it are the recipients. So that's the Prevail, system. So when it comes to, CMMC, the way the system works is that it actually says to the small to medium business, you don't need to go and rip and replace your O365 or Gmail. You simply add Prevail as an overlay service. And so what happens is if you were to look at your O365, Outlook client, you would see a second inbox in there. And this is where all your encrypted emails come in, and they have the same email address. If you are in Gmail, it adds a secure inbox to your Gmail. And this is where, again, your encrypted emails come in. And these are, again, fully compliant with, CMMC encryption techniques and so forth. So when you are sending an email to another person who's handling CUI, and you just identify the people in your company that handle CUI, then that email goes end-to-end encrypted, is stored in the appropriate cloud, complies with CMMC regulations. But for every other stuff, if you're dealing with, people that aren't handling CUI, you just continue to go and use O365, which, as you said, you like very much, and it's a nice, clean system. So it's a system that allows you to retain what you're doing, not have to rip and replace anything. And in fact, you just provision Prevail. It takes days to go and provision. And so the first thing that happens is you just start emailing in a CMMC compliant manner with other people that handle CUI.
Let me ask a question there. So
yeah,
I think I understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is that I stay on my Office 365 commercial solution.
Correct.
That the people in my organization that handle CUI, I install Prevail for them, whatever that means. You can explain that. And then all of the emails that they send from that point forward will be CMMC or NIST SP 800-171 conforming.
That is correct.
Okay.
All the emails that are going between the people for whom Prevail has been installed. So the first thing that you would do is, remember, you were saying, I have a company that has 200 people, 50 of them handle CUI. So you would install Prevail for those 50 people.
Okay.
And now all of the emails that are flying back and forth between these, 50 people are encrypted end-to-end, compliant with CMMC.
Gotcha.
And
quick, is it all of their email? Like, so as an example, if that guy sends an email home to his wife saying, I'm going to be late, is that, does he have to, or do we specify that? Oh, anytime I'm sending an email to this other entity within the, within that handles CUI, those emails are encrypted. But if I send an email to somebody that's outside of that domain, if you will, or outside of that field of use, those emails are not encrypted. How does that work?
That is correct. Your understanding is absolutely correct. And so if you're sending, for example, an email to a colleague who handles CUI, that email will go encrypted. But if you're sending an email, as you said, to your wife, then that email will just go through regular O365 unencrypted, just as you were used to. But the system has the ability to keep the same email address. And I'll demystify it for you. You do it all the time, and it's not that complicated. So those of your users that use iPhones, when you send a text message on an iPhone, it's an iMessage. It's the same phone number. Right. But if you send a message to another Apple, user or an Apple phone, the message goes blue, and it's actually going through the Apple servers, and it's an iMessage. But if you're communicating with somebody who is not on Apple, the message is green, and it's going through the SMS network. But from your vantage point, you're communicating with the same phone number. You didn't have to change anything. So Prevail works very much like that. You're sitting in your Outlook, and if you're communicating with another Prevail user, which is a person who's handling CUI, the message is going encrypted end to end. It complies with CMMC. And if you send a message to someone who's not on, a CUI entity, it basically goes, through the regular O365 network. And there's one further nuance. You can, for example, if you are sending a message to a person who's not currently handling CUI, but you anticipate handling CUI in the future, you want that to be encrypted, then you simply turn encryption on button in the email, and what it'll do is it'll invite the other person to join, and they can join for free, just like WhatsApp and others. So that's how the system works, and the analogy hopefully helps in understanding it. If you'd like, I can also do a quick share of my screen.
Yeah, real quick. Yeah, do that. But I'd like that. So first of all, the analogy was great, and I think that will help people understand it really clearly. I did have one question. So I can force somebody to by default, it's going to encrypt if I'm sending it to the right person. What if I sent my wife CUI? Would it have any mechanism, to recognize that I'm sending CUI and encrypt it and prevent her from doing that, or is that not the field of use?
No, that's not the field of use.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously, if you make
they
the
could
mistake,
do that with DLP. We could overlay DLP or some other mechanism on top of that. So you're not a DLP solution. You are basically creating a community of understood users that are communicating CUI and ensuring that all communication relevant to that community is being encrypted in accordance with 80171 or CMMC.
That's correct. And now I'll just draw your attention to the screen. So this is your favorite Outlook. Here's a user, Alice. You see her regular emails are coming in, no change. And when you join Prevail, it automatically adds an encrypted inbox. And here you get your encrypted emails. It'll say it's encrypted, but you interact with it just as you would. So for example, you had sent me this virtual CISO podcast details. I forwarded it. And since I have encryption on, it came encrypted. So from a usability perspective, it's just the same as you're used to.
So I don't have to worry about so I'm not adding a password. I'm not adding an encryption key.
No,
I'm literally just sending email. But if I'm in box 1, it goes out unencrypted. If I'm in box 2, it goes out encrypted.
And it can be even better than that. And I'm going to show you that. So for example, let's say you create a new email. The message is by default unencrypted. But let's say you're sending the email to, Ed Murphy, who happens to be somebody who handles CUI. The moment I put Ed Murphy's name in, much like iMessage, it understands that this is a person who handles encrypted, and it goes encrypted. But if you were sending your email to, wife at, home.com, the system will basically, say, wife at home.com just goes through regular O365. So I hope that clarifies that.
It very much does. So it's what and this is, I've seen this once before. That was what impressed me, was the fact that it's super transparent. Yeah, it's super transparent. It's easy to deal with.
And the same thing holds, by the way, for file sharing. So in file sharing, you'll have a folder in your file system on your Mac or your PC. And all of the CUI, you just drag and drop into it. You've got folders in there. The first thing that happens is all your information syncs to your devices. So you got your information available to you on your phone, on your computer. But if you want to share it, you simply right click and say, I want to share it, say with John. I enter your regular email address and it shares it.
I'm assuming you guys don't work for free. So you're going to charge for this service. So why is that? So why would the economics be better to use what you're doing versus what you can do by migrating to the GCC High Cloud?
So I think you teased out the answer very well in the prior part of our conversation. So let's go step by step. So number one, you don't have to go and pay the consulting bill to do a rip and replace. So you don't, right off the bat, you go and, save all of the money that is required for any consulting services. Because Prevail, basically to deploy it, it's a consumer-friendly kind of system. So you can deploy it for a typical organization of, 10 to, 250 people. It'll probably take you, hours if you are a 10-person organization. Perhaps more appropriately, you do a little bit of planning and so forth. You're talking, a couple of days, but certainly over a span of a week, you can go and add Prevail. And so there's no disruption and no fees associated with the consulting. The second is that, the Prevail system, again, since we had never designed it with any CMMC or anything in mind, we basically designed it to be competitive with commercial systems like O365 and Dropbox from a file sharing, perspective. And so the price of Prevail is $20 a user a month if you're on a commercial cloud, but for government and CMMC, compliant customers, you got to be on AWS GovCloud, and the price over there is $30 a user. And the reason for the increase is because the price to store on AWS GovCloud is about 70% more. So the transparent pricing is that for every CUI person, you're paying $360 a user a year, and you get unlimited email and you get unlimited storage for your CUI. So if you got a terabyte of information, you can store it and so forth. But also the nice thing is that for flow down, let's say you're a vendor, but you want to flow down that information to a supplier. So then you share it with the supplier, and as a paying customer, you can share up to 100 gig of information to the supplier, and the supplier can join for free. And again, the system was designed inherently for virality to go and make it easy to communicate. Now, we're obviously not in the charity business, so we make it easy for the defense company to share the information, but it's our subsequent hope that if they're sharing it with another company, that company at some point would say, listen, I want to be CMMC compliant, and if my choices are better with Prevail, that they also become a paying customer and now have access to more controls, etc. But that's sort of how the business works. And so if you look at the combination of this, I go back to the example that you had of a 250-person company that has 50 employees that are handling CUI. So the GCC High bill was, $100,000. The Prevail bill to do so would be in the $15,000 a year, zip code, because you're not paying any, fees, and it's, the number of employees times $360. That's roughly the price that you pay. So it's a very, very simple math. There's nothing more to it.
All right. So to be clear, going GCC High, I move 250 users from, let's say, $30 to $80 to keep the math easy.
Whatever.
So,
yeah.
Right. So I've $50 times 200 people that didn't need it, right? Which is $10,000 a month. And what you're saying is that in your solution, I'm only adding, I'm only putting those 50 on I need. So I save that $10,000 a month that it would have cost me to upgrade everyone. And I didn't have as large a consulting bill. I might have a small consulting bill on the front end, but instead of a $30 to $50 to $100,000 consulting bill, I might have a $2,000 or $4,000 consulting bill. If I don't do it myself. I mean, again, assuming that we've got people on the phone, people listening to the podcast that are like, I'm just going to have somebody do it. You're saying that even a consultant could do this for them in hours to days. It's a pretty small project, or you could do it for them for that price.
That is correct. In fact, we do it for no charge. But let's say you're working with, say,
we're going to hold you, Sanjeev. They're going to hold you to that. You might want to roll that back.
So we today we do that. But in essence, I think your logic is more appropriate. That if you are doing it, having somebody do it, say Pivot Point's doing it for them, it will probably cost you a small amount for the time that you guys spend to do it. But it happens in a matter of days versus spending 3 to 6 months and $50,000. So the combination of these three attributes,
the speed, and it sounds like the speed too, because
no disruption.
One of the problems we're going to have here is that very often I think you're going to see people have to get to a GCC, to a CMMC certification fast. And if there's only 7 people that can do these upgrades and there's 300,000 people in line, you could be waiting in line for a year to get upgraded, right? So the reality is that you could be in a situation where this might be your only choice to get there fast. Otherwise you're waiting for a while.
Well, I actually don't know. I mean, right now there's not that, groundswell. I mean, hundreds, soon moving to thousands of companies are now in the process of
But
now.
think about it logically. If there's 7
No,
companies that
you're
are the only
right.
ones that can do this, and it takes them months to do it, there's a finite amount of bandwidth they have to be able to do these migrations. Which means that you're going to get in line for them, just the same way you're going to get in line for a CMMC audit at the beginning.
Yeah, I guess you do. The only reason, I would love to say that that's the case, but the reason I sort of hesitate a little bit is that, Microsoft's a very respectable, highly capable, organization. So, I gotta assume that if there's a groundswell of, 200,000 companies that want their services, that
they'll
it's
figure it
a
out.
great company. They're gonna
Yeah,
figure it out. I mean,
they didn't become Microsoft by not
they
figuring this
didn't.
stuff out.
Absolutely. So I have a great deal of respect for Microsoft. I mean, it's a great company, and
I'm
in
I'm actually a huge fan. Like I said, I'm a Microsoft fanboy. And that's, to be honest, that's one of the reasons I like your solution is that, if we had had the first conversation, you told me that you were going to become the DNSMX record and you were going to be the email host, we probably wouldn't have had another conversation. But the idea that you can use the 2 best platforms for mail and file sharing and use that transparently, but still comply with CMMC, to me, just made a lot of sense, which is why I thought it was such an interesting idea to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I think that's the whole notion that, again, our birth was out of MIT, and it was all about providing the very best security. And so, much as our conversation's going, you and I have spoken about the fact that we're a lot cheaper than Microsoft GCC High, and that's true. We've also spoken about the fact that we're far easier to deploy in a matter of hours to a day versus months, and that's also true. And so SMBs, small to medium businesses, love us for those reasons. But I'll tell you something, that the real reason I want people to love us is because at the end of the day, we are radically more secure. And it's an important thing. And it's something that's very, very, very important for us to discuss. But ultimately, what we get with Prevail is, notwithstanding the economic and the disruption business benefits, is absolutely state-of-the-art security that, in this particular case, notwithstanding my admiration for Microsoft as a wonderful corporation, is hands down better than what Microsoft offers at its highest level of security. And we should talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, let's do that. Explain that.
So let me explain, why that is the case. So again, 5 years ago, I went to my alma mater, MIT, and I told you I was an entrepreneur before and built the US wireless data network for 3G for maybe about 30% of the company. And I wanted to understand, what makes for great computer security. So I went to my alma mater, MIT, and I spoke to 2 of the top security experts over there, Nikolai Zaldovich, professor of computer security, and my now co-founder, Raluca Popa, who's 35 under 35 for top technology visionaries and a professor of computer security at UC Berkeley. And they educated me and said, look, the basic paradigm for security, why hacks are happening over and over again, is that the old model of security is like that of a fort.
Keep talking.
So you build a wall around the information.
My glass went dry, Sanjeev. I apologize. Gotta have priorities in life.
Yeah. So the old model of security is all about, like the medieval forts. You build a wall around the information and you hope that the wall prevents the attacker from getting to the information. So
or the moat, right?
or the moat, whatever. But in information technology, the wall or the moat is made of software. And what the academics and the NSA, which is the other entity that knows everything that there is to know about security, recognized was that no matter how tall the wall, or how deep the moat, the attacker is going to get through, because these walls and moats are made of software, and software's got bugs. So you're in the software business, you know that patches keep coming for servers, and they have been coming for the past 40 years, and you'll still be installing patches. So the moment that there is a vulnerability discovered in either the server software, or there's a chink in the armor of the firewalls that protect, the attacker exploits it, and they will inevitably get to the information. Second, legacy systems. And that's how O365 works, Gmail works. The servers see the information, and they try to protect you by building walls around it. But ultimately, if the attacker gets to the servers, they see the information. That's the first principle. The second thing that I was educated was that, the information is protected also by this notion called a password. But we all know that they can be easily guessed, you can phish, you can steal them, etc. And so now you give access to accounts remotely because you got a password. Third, they said, look, who's guarding the entire system in an enterprise? And that enterprise's guardian is an admin. But the admin represents what we call a central point of attack. The admin needs access to the information, but if you get to the admin, you get to the whole candy jar, and the entire organization's compromised. So that was the old paradigm, and for more or less, the walls are taller and the moats are deeper with GCC and O365, but the paradigm is just the same. What the academics and the NSA say is, if you want real security, you got to assume that the adversary, who is far more sophisticated, it's a state level, sponsored guy, is far more sophisticated than you. They will inevitably, get to the servers, they'll get to the admin, and they'll get to your passwords. So how do you protect the information when that happens? And so the NSA guidelines and the academics model is encrypt everything end to end. So as we discussed, that means information is encrypted on your device and can only be decrypted by the recipient, but the server only sees encrypted information. So now, unlike the moat or the wall model, if the attacker gets to the server, all they get is encrypted gibberish, and there's no means for them to decrypt it because they have no keys to decrypt it. The keys are only with the recipient. So that's the first thing. The second is modern systems like Prevail, and that's what Prevail does, by the way. So when your information's going in a Prevail email or on a Prevail, file share, it's stored on AWS GovCloud, and we, the provider of the system, have no ability to hack it, to look at that information. We're seeing it, but it's encrypted gibberish. And so neither can the attacker. Whereas if you are on...
I was just going to say, so just because people might not be following something. So when you encrypt something, right, it's like the equivalent of a lock on a file, right? And that lock has a password, if you will. And I think what you're saying is that, and a key point for them to understand is that it's where the key is, right? So either it's not locked, and then if I gain access to the system, I have access to it, or it is locked, but if the key is kept in a similar location, so if you have a safe in your house and it has a key, but you keep the safe in your house, an attacker getting into your house is going to get into your safe. So I think what you're saying is that you're storing this data in a location, and it's encrypted, and the key to unlock that file is not being kept within that AWS cloud, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And furthermore, true security comes from the provider of the system, namely us. We designed the system. We should never, ever have the ability to access that key, and we don't. So the keys exclusively belong to the users or the organizations that handle them. And that's a cardinal principle. And so now you've got a system that if the attacker gets to the server, and even if the attacker is a malintended Prevail employee, all they can see is just encrypted gibberish. Whereas what has happened in attack after attack, take the Capital One attack on Amazon services, It was an admin. The admin attacked through a firewall. They got to the server. The information was viewable on the server, and so therefore all the Capital One records were disclosed. So that's the first principle, that keep the information encrypted exactly like you described, John, where the keys are never visible to the server, and therefore the information is secure.
Okay.
And that's why the NSA, in its recent guidance in May, when it basically said, listen, there's the pandemic, people are now working from home, we got to guide government agencies on how to protect information. And so their first criteria was use services that have end-to-end encryption. So that's first principle.
Mm-hmm.
The second principle is don't use passwords. So passwords, no matter, you use 8 letters or some characters, a fast enough computer can crack it in some time. It could be, hours, it could be days. But if instead of using a password, you use a key on your device which enables access, and that's an encryption key, that cannot be guessed. So I'll give you a very neat statistic. So an encryption key basically is like the number of atoms in the universe, not just our solar system, but the entire universe. The universe has 100 billion galaxies, each with 100 billion stars. So no amount of compute power can go and guess that. So if you're using that to access it, it is something that is way more secure than even your biometric, fingerprint. And so now the attacker can't guess that, and they can't remotely log it. And then the third thing that you do is that for enterprise systems, you allow the admin the ability to access the information, which they must for, say, e-discovery, forensics, if the employee emails need to be archived or whatever. But don't give the single admin the ability to do so unilaterally. So we borrow a concept from the nuclear launch code. So in the United States, if you want to launch a nuclear weapon, you don't give one individual the ability to say, I feel like it, I press a button and I launch it. Some number of people have to come together to go and enable that. So we do the same thing cryptographically in Prevail, and it's a concept called approval group. So an organization sets up an approval group. It could say, hey, I need a minimum of 2 people to agree out of, say, 6 admins or 2 out of 8 employees, whatever you want. And so what happens is the user's keys are broken up into little pieces. So now each admin has only a little fragment of the key. So if you attack and compromise a Prevail admin, you get nothing because the admin only has a fragment of the keys to access your encrypted information. But if the admin wants to get at it, say you've been sued, you want access to all your emails and files, the admin will get access to the keys by asking for permission. And now the little fragments of the keys, if you can put in your mind's eye, come together, and the organization has the ability to do everything that they were used to doing. And when you put these 3 things together, you now have a system where you cannot attack the server, you cannot attack the admin, and you cannot compromise passwords and remotely access, content. And so you provide true security. And that's the security that NSA guidance is saying you ought to be, providing. And that's where my heart is, which is that yes, you like Prevail because we're cheaper. That's great. Yes, you like it because we're faster to deploy. That's great. But ultimately, the reason you should pick Prevail is because we are way more secure than even a GCC High system or an O365 system. And I'll share with you momentarily after we talk why that matters.
Okay, so real quick for you. So a couple unravel a lot of content there.
Yeah.
To echo what you said about passwords, right? We have a box in our office that will guess 300 billion passwords per second, something like 24 quadrillion per day. Yeah. We can compromise a 10,000 person network if we get their Hive from Active Directory in any 8-character password in 7 hours. So to your point, passwords are no longer a really secure way, and that's a box that we built for $5,000. If we built one for $50,000, you can imagine what the number would be. So
You got
passwords
it.
are passwords are a problem. So when you're using encryption keys, which were much longer links, I agree with you. That's a great way to do it. Second thing is that I just want to make sure people understood, and make sure I understood for that matter. I love the N of M administrative scheme. That's a common use of when we store keys in hardware storage modules to make sure that we don't have one person take action. So I think what you're saying is that if a file's been encrypted by John, an email that went out from John, and it's got an encrypted file attached, that even if I were to compromise an admin of the organization, that one admin would not be able to see John's file. He would need to partner with how many of we've specified need to be involved in order for that file to be decrypted by somebody other than John. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, cool. And one last question for you, and I don't know the answer to this. Does Microsoft's GCC Cloud not store GCC High? Are the files stored in encrypted format there? They're encrypted at rest.
Yes,
They're
they
encrypted
are.
at rest, but where's the key? Is that
Yes.
the problem? Is that the
So-
key is at Microsoft in their, either on that server or in a key server somewhere?
That is exactly right. So obviously, Microsoft's a sophisticated organization, and any email system worth its salt, including O365 and Gmail. Well, I'll exclude Gmail for now, but certainly any of the Microsoft systems, they do two things. One, they encrypt in transit, which means the email is encrypted when it goes from your computer to their servers. And the second is when it's stored on the server, the email is encrypted at rest when it's not being accessed. But you articulated the vulnerability very well earlier, which is the keys are accessible to the server. So therefore, if the attacker gets to the server, they are able to, how does the email get rendered if you're seeing it on a web browser? It's because, you get the key, you decrypt it, and you render it.
Right.
And therein lies the problem, because if the attacker has compromised the server, he or she is seeing everything that the server is seeing. And if the server says, fetch me the key, the attacker says, fetch me the key. And it's a very subtle but a profound difference.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, Microsoft encrypts in transit. Absolutely, they encrypt at rest. But the system is not secure because the keys are accessible to the server.
Right. And you're talking about an attacker. You could also have a rogue admin. Right. You could have a guy that's an admin, whether it's in your own company, and you're hosting your own email or there, and a rogue admin has access to all of that data. Okay.
That is precisely that. And then again, a recent example of that, Twitter had two admins, and there was all this brouhaha about Khashoggi and all this unseemly mess about the gentleman being murdered by the Saudi administration. In Twitter, there were two admins, and they basically had, legitimate access. They were Saudi nationals. And again, I don't want to be, pandering in any sort of nationalistic stuff, but they happen to be Saudi nationals. They, in essence, got access to information that, Saudi Arabia presumably needed access to. And as admins got it, transferred it, and then took a flight out the next day, and they were gone. So, but the point is that even if it's a rogue admin, or even if it's not a rogue admin, it's a compromised admin. The results are the same.
Yep, I would agree.
And therein, that's what makes the system fallible. And so you identified yourself very methodically that the vulnerabilities lie in these systems because the information can be accessed on the server, notwithstanding encryption in transit and at rest. They can be accessed through passwords. You got a $5,000 box that can crack it. If you have a key-based system, you can put, all the compute power on earth and you can't crack it.
No, right.
And then the third thing that you have is this admin, conundrum. And when you take the totality of it, what we do at Prevail is no ability to crack on the server, no ability to crack the password, which is the key in our case, and no ability to, breach the admin from the vantage point of, even if you breach the admin, since there's an N out of M scheme, you got to breach all admins that are necessary before you can get to it, which is a much tougher act to accomplish.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And I would imagine if you ended up also potentially storing data in Azure, that Microsoft would probably prefer to partner with you because in some ways you actually solve a problem for them, right? They need
Absolutely.
that. They need that access to that data, because of what they do. And in a weird way, you give them a better solution and solve one of their problems. I guess the only thing that Microsoft probably wouldn't love about your solution right now is that you're putting the data in AWS and paying them the freight for that, as opposed to Azure.
Yeah, and security has so many ironies. You brought up a fascinating point. So Microsoft systems were built over time, and Microsoft is itself frustrated
Yeah.
by its own ability to access the data. So it happens all the time that they are actually often suing the Justice Department because they complain that the Justice Department can go to Microsoft and compel them
Yep.
to
And you solve
give
that. You solve that problem. In fact, you and I have a conversation we need to have. Yeah, you and I have a conversation we need to have because there's a client of ours that views the U.S. government as a nation-state adversary, and they would prefer to use Office 365 for the convenience, but they don't want that, or SharePoint for that matter, but they don't want that ability for the government to mandate the turnover of data. And you'd actually solve that problem, and I hadn't thought of that prior. Because they could demand it from Microsoft, but Microsoft doesn't hold the keys.
Yeah.
So that's
So
kind of a clever thing.
And that's the reason, again, we built Prevail from the grounds up, because our perspective is exactly that, whether it's the US government, but if it's the adversary is a sophisticated adversary. So if the government, or whatever is attacking the system, we have nothing. We'll just go pass on the data. Even if they'll compromise us, they'll get access to the encrypted information, but there's no key to decrypt it. And likewise, we take a very methodical approach. We will cooperate with the government at every aspect. But in essence, if they ask us for the data, we'll hand it over. But we don't have the Microsoft problem where, they decrypt it and hand it over. If you want, we live in a lawful society. The government can go to the organization and say, hand over the data, and the organization will hand over the data and the keys. But we offer a secure system, and we don't have the ability to go and look at that data. So that's a key difference as well.
Gotcha. All right, so we're going to probably need to wrap here because I would think no matter how much people like CMMC in your face and my face, that or our voices if they're listening on a regular podcast, an hour and 15 minutes is a long time to hear us chat. So one quick question for you.
Yeah.
As an organization, so if I'm listening to you, I'm like, wow, this sounds pretty cool. All right, he's saving me money. He's more secure. I'm still using Microsoft, so I still have a great underlying tool set. How do I know that when the CMMC auditors come in that, they're going to look at what I've done working with Prevail and say, yep, that works. Are you CMMC approved? Is there how would somebody know that if they used you, that the answer at the end of the process is going to be a thumbs up?
So I think that, here's what I would say. So on our website is a CMMC white paper. And in there, we looked at all 130 requirements that you need to comply with. And we worked with third-party auditors that are in the business of auditing. And they looked at the controls and said, look, here are the controls for handling CUI in emails and files. And here's why Prevail meets them. So I cannot and I will not say that, we are, compliant because, the rules are still, moving. And so it's not that, I can say that there's an ironclad assurance. But, since these rules were based on NIST 1, on the NIST, framework, auditors are very familiar with them, and we work with them. And the language is there per each, control. So you can take a look at that. But going forward, that's our proactive, strategy. So we'll continue to work with leading auditors to ensure that as the standard sort of evolves, that there's an assurance that we are meeting the requirements and updating them. But there should be a fair level of confidence based on just the CMMC, white paper that we have. But also, others have looked at the system as well, including several that do that authored the CMMC, and so there's again not a guarantee right now. No one can, not even Microsoft can guarantee it.
No,
But
absolutely agree.
certainly we're taking the right steps, to do so.
Yep.
If I may, I want to make one last point before we conclude.
Sure.
Which is that, look, we stand in a very interesting era where, the nature of war itself has shifted. So, for your listeners, they may be listening and saying, oh my God, the CMMC, it's a pain in the rear, and I got to do work and so forth. But I want to make the case for why it matters. So in the past, our model for war is, that we have a world-class forces, the best that the world has ever known, and that they are going to go fight the wars and protect us. But I submit to you that we are, as the defense industrial base, now active combatants in war. So the military relies on two things: superb, personnel and training, but second is, advanced technology and weapon systems. And what has happened in the past, 5 to 10 years is that, we have technological advantage in weapons, in technology, but those weapon systems are built by the DIB companies. So if the adversary, who is again far more sophisticated, they're nation state actors, if they compromise the supply chain at various levels and do two things: one, either steal the technology, in which case our advantage is neutralized in terms of time, or two, mess with it, tinker with it, so that when it comes to combat time, the specification of the screw that I built was slightly messed up and the weapons don't perform as desired. In both cases, we have basically neutralized our enormous competitive advantage that we hold today for national security. And this war is going on. As human beings, we have evolved to just, respond to an adversary that you can see. I can see somebody who's got a gun in front of me and I react to it. But we are not well trained to respond to an actor that I can't see, but nonetheless exists. And the warfare is happening 7/24. And for that reason, I say that, we should take security, because it's a shared responsibility of the DIB. And really, every company in the DIB is an active combatant.
Yeah. No,
You're
it's
an
funny.
active combatant.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was listening to you talk, and a thought occurred to me, and I'm sure somebody else smarter than me has probably mentioned this before. But in the same way that the American Revolution, was a shift in battle approach, right? You could make an argument that how we fought in the American Revolution was the genesis of guerrilla warfare, right? And realistically, I think in the same way that that shifted at that point, and that probably has persisted, through some of the Middle Eastern issues that we've been involved in. We've made that transition from that world, and we're making that transition into the same cyber warfare world. And I agree with you 100%. I had Katie on the podcast, and some people might say it's corny, but I actually think what we're doing is critical to both our national defense and our economic well-being. I think this is really important stuff. I mean, if we want to remain a world power, I don't think the CMMC is, BS. I don't think it's. I don't think this is not worthwhile to do. In fact, I'm very proud to be doing the work with the CMMC. So, you and I are on the same page.
Yeah, I think, as with anything, the standards got its heart at its right place. And it certainly will have shortcomings, and it'll need to be improved. It'll need to be made friendly to the small business. But what you and I are talking about is the more deeper, issue that, the security of the nation is not in the hands of, our armed forces, but really the battleground is, in the hands of the DIB companies. And it wasn't that, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You made your armaments and you handed it to the competent men and women of the armed forces to execute war. But that's not how the battle's being fought. And it is for that reason we do what my mother said, that if you point a finger and say, you got one finger pointed somewhere else, 3 point at you. And so for that reason, I think, we ought to take the matter of cybersecurity so seriously. And it's for that reason I say that the real reason I want people to prefer Prevail is really for the extraordinary security we provide, less so for the reasons they will probably choose us for, which is economics.
All right, I have two last questions for you. One is fun and one is serious. The fun one is, give me a fictional character or real person that you would think would make an amazing or a horrible CISO, and why?
God, who would make?
You didn't prepare for this. We gave you this question ahead of time, Sanjeev.
I will
Folks,
have to think about it.
He's unprepared.
I am unprepared for this one.
You're from MIT. I expect that those high IQ guys can really quick come up with something off the cuff.
Yeah. I have to go to the second one.
Oh, man. I got to be honest, you disappointed me, Sanjeev. I got to be honest. Second question is easier. You talk every day with business leaders and information security leaders. Any other interesting topics for another episode that you'd recommend?
I think that, I feel that, security is not quite well understood. And I would suggest that, the NSA did us all a big favor by issuing a 9-point guidance, which is very clear on what constitutes security. So I think that a panel where we can talk about, and bring probably like a security expert, like a great professor from a university or folks from the NSA, would be an excellent, topic for conversation. And frankly, also the discussion of the economic impact. I think here I do refer to General Keith Alexander, who was head of the NSA, who said that, listen, the theft of intellectual property through cyber, attacks represents the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind. And so I think it is for those reasons that we probably should warrant a good, discussion, and probably a nice topic to have.
Yep, I would agree. I actually like that. The NSA 9-point guidance would be a good topic for a podcast.
Yeah.
Cool. So did you stalled long enough? Do you have
a
so answer, or am I gonna have to you're gonna be the first? I don't want to put the pressure on you. I think we're up to podcast 20 or 25. Everybody else had an answer, Sanjeev. I'm just saying.
I will say this, that, in general, a politician, and I give a category, a politician, with one exception, would make a bad CISO, because politicians are interested in sounding good and looking good and not caring about the substance. And in security, you got to pay attention to the details. And so they would make a bad choice. And the one exception I have to hand it is Katie Arrington. I have to say that she is a politician, but I think because of her background as a military,
she came out of the DIB space, right? I mean, she was in
the DIB space. Her spouse was wounded in combat.
Yep.
And because of that, I think a politician, which was also her training, she was in the House of Representatives, would also make a great CISO. So I'll give this answer in the same, vein, that the general variety politician makes a terrible, CISO. And in particular, they get my goat because, and I'm an independent over here.
Yeah, I am.
But with all of the stuff that has happened, with the attacks on the DNC, with the elections being hacked and so forth in 2016, I am galled and appalled at the fact that there's still no real, security being put on the political parties' side. Mm-hmm. And this holds both for the Republicans and for the Democrats. They're still sending Gmails and they're still doing their things. And so they represent, they love to talk about security, but never, do anything about it.
Not what it impacts, their ability to communicate. We were working recently with someone in a very political role, and it was amazing. They were like, well, this is great. We need to be super secure. And when we suggested maybe using an iPhone with, conventional apps like Twitter on it, it wasn't the right way to be secure. They were like, oh, no, we can't do that.
Yeah. And I even go and say, listen, guys, do something as simple as, again, use end-to-end encrypted apps like WhatsApp. I mean, it's super simple for messaging.
Signal. Signal's a great product. Or even these voice, these IP, these things which randomize that you can have up to 9 numbers and it randomizes them. Yeah.
But they are not going to do that. And that's why my answer to your question is that, politicians, you literally pick almost any one of them, would make the worst CISOs possible. But there's one exception to the rule, happens to be a politician, but she makes it.
You know what? But she actually, in a weird way, you cheated because I would say Katie is no longer a politician. Katie is technically a CISO. So
no, she is a CISO.
Yeah, I know. So you just said that the most amazing or horrible CISO is actually a CISO. So I actually think it was a cop-out, Sanjeev, but I'm not gonna argue with you any longer because you've already, for anyone who's still listening, you've already set the record for the longest podcast that we've done. So with that, I'm gonna ask for a farewell. So if anybody who's still listening said, hey, this guy sounds pretty smart and this product sounds pretty cool and we might want to talk about it, how can people get in contact with you or with the good folks over there at Prevail?
So I think I'll give 3 easy answers for that one. You can always go to www.prevail, Preveil.com and contact us. I'll give you my email. It's Sanjeev, SANJEEV @prevail.com. And I'll put John in the hot seat. You can also contact John, and he knows how to reach me. So
do not contact John. That was payback, wasn't it? Well, with that, Sanjeev, thank you for being on the podcast. Super appreciated. A lot of great information here. Appreciated.
And it's been a real pleasure. You are so clear in your thinking, and I appreciate the opportunity, John. And I want to get together and have some nice wine sometime.
You got a deal.
Thank you.